In this video, I'm going to be covering the basic properties of the basic trig functions, sine, cosine, and tangent. So first of all, it's written sin, cos, and tan, but you read them out as sine, cosine, and tangent. And it's always of some angle theta or x. The letter I put here doesn't matter too much as long as I keep straight what everything is. And to explain what these are, I'm going to draw a triangle. These are what you need to know about these guys. So let's say there's my angle here, angle theta. And I call this side x, or if you want to be more descriptive, the adjacent side. And I call this side y, or once again, if you want to be more descriptive, the opposite side. And then this would be the r for radius, or the hypotenuse. Okay, and this is assumed to be a right angle. Okay, so what is sine of theta, where theta is this angle right here? Well, by definition, it is y over r, or once again, if that seems confusing, you can remember it instead as the opposite, so the side of the triangle right across from the angle, over the hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse is always the one directly across from the right angle. Because sometimes when you're doing a problem, this triangle may not be written this way. It may be flipped around or reversed or something. And students can get confused about which side the hypotenuse is. Well, it's always across from the right angle all the time. OK, so that's sine. What about cosine? Well, cosine is x over r, cosine of theta, I should say, this angle, x over r. And that would be the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. OK, well, what about tangent? Tangent is defined to be, if I'm looking at this theta, so tangent of theta, is y over x. Or in other words, opposite over adjacent. What's kind of nice here as well is that tangent actually is also the same thing as sine divided by cosine. If you do some of the algebra here, I'll do that right here, and you take what I wrote here for sine and cosine, y over r and x over r. So y over r divided by x over r. Remember from algebra that if you're dividing two fractions, you flip the bottom one and you multiply. People often say keep, change, and flip. So you keep the top, you change division to multiplication, and you flip the bottom. KCF. Then these cancel out because they're the same, and you multiply straight across, and you get y over x, which, ta-da, tangent. It's useful to know this if maybe you're doing a problem and for some reason you figured out what sine is on its own, and you figured out what cosine is on its own. Then if you needed to know what tangent is, you don't need to look at the triangle and calculate it. You can just take those two answers you got before and divide them. So it can save you a little bit of work, although, again, regardless, you should get the same answer. So these are the three basic trig functions. I will mention that there are three others that are just the reciprocals of these. Reciprocal meaning 1 over. So 1 over sine is defined to be, it's CSC, and it's pronounced cosecant. And really, you would just flip this fraction. So this would be r over y, or in other words, the hypotenuse over the opposite side. Now, I will say that because this is physics, all the times where you'll actually be constructing a triangle and using trigonometry to get your values, your ratios of sides, you can get by with sine, cosine, and tangent basically all the time. So don't worry too much about memorizing these. Focus on these. But I'm just letting you know they exist if you're reading a book, or they're used for saving some steps. This is what they are. 1 over cosine is secant. Once again, just invert the cosine, so it's r over x, or hypotenuse over adjacent. And then 1 over tangent equals cotangent. X over y, which would be adjacent
over opposite.
Again, don't worry too much about these. They're there, know what they are, but you can always use these for basically every physics problem I've seen so far. Okay, so these are the three basic trig functions. This is how they're defined. It's what they mean. And these are the what's called the inverse trig function. I'm sorry, reciprocal trig functions. Inverse trig functions are something else that will be in another video. Okay, so those are the three basic trig functions with the triangle that defines them.